Now, I invite you to consider this morning the question, ask not what your brain can do for you, but what you can do for your brain. Because neuroscientists have discovered that we can dramatically improve our brain function at any age or stage of life. Now, the human brain constitutes less than 2% of our body weight, yet it uses 20% of our blood supply, 20% of our energy, and generates around 20% of our heat. Now, what that means in practical terms is that 1/5 of all the nutrients you took in at breakfast this morning went to your brain to supply it with essential raw materials. 1/5 of any junk you eat, which clearly if you're working in healthcare you wouldn't. But 1/5 of any junk we eat also goes to our brain to jam its mental machinery, to actually slow down our cognitive processes. And 1/5 of all the calories we consume go to our brains to keep our cognitive wheels turning. Because in fact, thinking, planning, decision making are high energy work and use up a lot of calories. So if you want to shed a few kilos, do some deep thinking. It burns calories. So the first thing to note about the brain is that it consumes a disproportionate amount of our resources, and that's something that we influence on a daily basis. And I'd like to share with you that neuroscientists in the last 15 years have made the most amazing discovery probably in the whole of human history. Because that discovery is that the brain can change itself. Just stop and think about that for a moment. What does that actually mean? Well, it means that the brain can grow new cells. It can make new connections between existing cells. It can establish whole new circuits. The brain can even change which cells perform which functions, and this has revolutionised stroke treatment. We used to think that if somebody had a stroke, paralysed say half their body, if they didn't get better after maybe 12 weeks of rehab, they never would. We now know that with intensive prolonged therapy known as constraint-induced therapy, where they actually strap up the good side and do progressive exercises with the paralysed side, that people actually can regain use of their paralysed limb. Why? Because cells from undamaged parts of the brain can take over the lost functions. And an analogy would be, say in your organisation, the whole IT department just ran off and disappeared. Well, you could just easily then retrain sales, marketing, and admin to take over IT. That's what the brain can do. It's phenomenal. And we call this remarkable ability of the brain to change itself neuroplasticity. Can I just have a show of hands? How many of you have come across that term before? Oh, the whole room, obviously. Okay, great. I will define it to make sure we're all on the same page. Neuroplasticity comes from two words. Neuron meaning brain cell, and plastic meaning malleable or able to be moulded. And what neuroplasticity means is that every single one of us can, and in fact does, influence how our own brain operates and develops throughout our entire life. And this actually flies in the face of what we've believed for most of human history. How many of you have heard, and this is what I was taught in medical school 20 years ago. I know, looking at me, you're thinking 2 years ago. That's been 20. I was taught that the brain is actually the only organ that can't regenerate or repair itself. Have you heard that? That once you've had that alcoholic binge, you've lost it? Not to encourage the alcoholic binge, however, we do actually continue to make brain cells throughout our lives. Roughly 5,000 new brain cells every day of our lives, when we're young, when we're old, and every age in between. And what's more, it's our day-to-day habits and choices that influence how well those brain cells function. Now, why is this so important? Because the brain runs the show of our lives. I know every so often you meet someone in whom you really doubt that. But even in his case, Sorry, you're outnumbered. No, the whole point of this was to agitate you a little, because researchers found that people learn best when they're in a state of mild arousal. So I'm trying to get you mildly aroused. Legally. Look, Robin Williams explained it when he said, God did so give men a brain and a penis, but only enough blood to supply one at a time. No, to reassure you, I really do have the most wonderful man in my life. I'm really lucky. I have a man who is kind and caring. I have a man who loves kisses and cuddles. And I even have a man who cooks and cleans. How lucky am I? Especially as I have a way of making sure these three men never meet. So as I was saying, if we can boost our brains, we can boost every aspect of our lives. We can think better, work better, create better, relate better, perform better, and achieve far more than we ever thought possible. And really importantly, we can significantly reduce our risk of dementia, including Alzheimer's disease. Because we used to think that dementia was bad luck, bad genes, or bad parents. and we now know that it's profoundly influenced by our lifestyles. And it all starts, so basically, the benefit of what I say to you today is I'll show you how to boost your brains in the moment to be more productive and effective, but the double bonus is you will also be significantly reducing your risk of dementia. And it all starts by understanding that the brain behaves like a muscle. The more actively we use our brains, the more different ways we engage our brains, the bigger, the more complex, and the more effective they can become. Now here's something fascinating. The brains of wild animals are 15 to 30% larger than the brains of their tame domestic counterparts. Why? What is it about being wild that boosts their brains? And does it apply to humans? Probably not in that case. But if we all got wild, would it boost our brains? The short answer is we have a lot to learn from wild animals. And before I elaborate, I just want to give you a little bit more of my background. As I said, I'm a medical doctor and I've been doing research on boosting the brain for over a decade. Now, when I first graduated from medicine, I was really set on being a psychiatrist. But 3 months into my psychiatry career, I had a profound realisation that I would end up being a patient myself if I stayed with it. So I switched to sexual health. A logical choice since I knew nothing about sex and I figured I could learn a few things, which I did. I then cut out a niche, so to speak, doing vasectomies. That was another arousal moment. That was the nearest thing to psychiatry. Before I then took up a specialty in lifestyle-based diseases, which account for over 80% of cases presenting to GPs. But it was then that I became passionate about boosting the brain because I experienced firsthand how education is more powerful than medication and how boosting the brain can take people's health, their learning and their performance to a whole new level. So that's what I'm going to answer this morning. What can we do to boost our brain so that we perform at our peak on a daily basis, so that we actually tap into brain potential we never knew we had, and so that we can be more creative and innovative and respond to change. And this is all wildly exciting because for so long, we've lived under the delusion that the brain we're born with, we're stuck with. And it's actually a self-fulfilling prophecy. How many of you have heard of architect Frank Lloyd Wright? Yeah, he designed the Guggenheim Museum in New York at the age of 90. Benjamin Franklin invented bifocal glasses at age 78. And Julia Britton, at age 97, was still a highly successful Australian playwright and had 3 plays produced in January 2009. Who here has had 3 plays produced? Great, then that's something you have to look forward to. Because that level of mental functioning isn't restricted to a few genetically lucky individuals. It's possible for every single person in this room. And it also means it'll help us address the increasing need for workforce. Because if we're more switched on and healthier as we age, we'll actually be able to work longer into our lives. So, I'm going to give you today 10 fundamental principles to boost your brain. I know you're only supposed to give people like 3 or 5 take-home messages, but I've already sussed you out. You are smart, switched on and savvy. You will enjoy 10. Are you ready for them? Yeah. Okay. Principle number 1 is simply to get an attitude. Now, we all have an attitude, but what neuroscientists asked was, is there a prevailing way of thinking, which constitutes attitude, that actually improves brain function? And they found that the answer was yes, that thinking does profoundly affect how our brains work. And they found that the most powerful attitude to have was simply a can-do attitude. And the easiest way to get a can-do attitude was to cut it out, was to cut that 4-letter word out of your vocabulary. And that word, of course, is can't, C-A-N''T. Now, this sounds really simplistic because we tell our children, there's no such thing as can't when they don't want to do something we want them to do. But the fact is, neuroscientists have discovered that the human brain is highly sensitive and responsive to language. So everything we say to ourselves, either out loud or silently inside our own heads, actually has the effect of giving our brain cells a set of instructions. It relates to what I said earlier. We don't see with our eyes, we see with our brains. And our language, our self-talk, actually creates a filter through which we see the world. So if I predetermine that I can't do something, I literally close off my ability to see how it can be done. It means that I just don't notice when an opportunity presents itself that would help me solve the problem. You might have experienced this with someone. You walk into a room and somebody's flustered and stressed and saying, I just can't do this. And you look around and you say, well, have you tried this? and they think you're a genius. How did you see it when I didn't? Because we talk ourselves into a state of mind blindness. And it isn't only the word can't, it's actually all the euphemisms we have for can't. It's impossible, it's not working, we'll never get there. As an organisation, studies have found that the more positive an outlook and the more of a can-do attitude people have, the more they actually achieve. And it is because we are seeing the world differently. Now this is a powerful concept, so I'd actually like to invite a big, strong, handsome man to help me demonstrate something. I'm spoilt for choice. You're deliberately looking away, so that means up you come. Okay, just up the stairs there. And what's your name?
I'm John.
This is?
John.
John, thank you very much, John. We're going to do a simple little exercise. I'd like you have no shoulder injuries?
No.
Hold your arms out wide, stay really strong, and stop me pushing your arms down. And before I do that, I'd like you to say out loud 10 times so everyone can hear, I'm strong, I'm strong, I'm strong.
Okay.
Okay? Go. And think about a time you're strong.
I'm
Go.
strong, I'm 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 strong.
Oh, he's strong. John is strong. All right, thank you. Roll your shoulders, have a little break. We're going to do that one more time. Exactly the same thing, stay strong, but this time I'd like you to say out loud 10 times, I'm weak, I'm weak, I'm weak. And think of a time you might have been weak. Now I know you're a man, so you were never weak. but just 10 times I'm weak, think about it, but stay strong. Okay. So the only thing that's changed is your language. Sure. Go for it.
I'm weak, 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 I'm weak.
What happened?
I was weak.
Weaker. Right. Our language does affect our physiology. Thank you very much. I invite you to try that in the breaks. But it's actually very powerful to listen to teach a child as well. That when they come home and say, I can't do maths, and you try this exercise with them, they'll get you to do it 10 times because they just won't believe it's possible, but it is. So I do invite you to try it. And there's a story from Dr. Timothy Sharp, who's a Sydney-based psychologist and author, that actually demonstrates this. His family came from rural Europe. And one day they were all out at the markets when a delivery of chickens arrived at their door. And there was no one home, so they just left the chickens in a flimsy old crate. By the time the family got home, all the chickens had escaped. Not a feather left. So they spent the whole afternoon racing around town looking for these chickens. And grandfather was not happy. So he rings the chicken supplier and he says, listen, mate, or whatever the European equivalent of listen, mate would have been. He says, don't do something so irresponsible. You left livestock at our front door. They've all escaped. We've wasted the whole afternoon looking for them and we've only managed to retrieve 11 of them. And the chicken supplier said, well, that's not too bad. We only delivered 6. So you'll find if you drop your preconceived ideas about the limits of what's possible, you will achieve so much more. Now, I can see some of you looking at me saying, well, that's all very well, but it leaves a vacuum in my vocabulary. What am I supposed to say during those frustrating moments that things aren't going to plan if I've eliminated can't? Excellent question. It brings us to the next brain boosting principle, which is to get curious. Albert Einstein said curiosity has its own reason for existence, and neuroplasticity has shown us what that reason is. Curiosity actually puts demands on the brain to get creative and to find solutions. So in this context, from now on, whenever you feel like saying, I can't, or something's not happening, simply swap it for the word, how. We used to think that if you do the positive thinking and say, I can, it will change things. It's not changing the word can't to can, but it's changing the word can't to how. So instead of saying, I can't do this, ask, how can I do this? I can't understand this. How can I understand this? I can't get through to him. How can I get through to him? When we change linguistic categories, we go from a statement to a question, it changes the way our brains operate, and subconscious, we actually scan our environment looking for solutions. And you'll find if you start asking how, rather than predetermining that it isn't happening, you start asking how, you'll notice you're having a conversation with someone and something they say will trigger the answer and you think, where did that's exactly what I needed to know. Or you're reading the paper or a document or listening to the radio and the information you needed will just come to you. It's because it creates a change in focus. We now see things differently and we are scanning the environment looking for answers. And I've actually introduced this principle in my own home with my father. My father has dementia and I actually left the workforce full-time just to care for him, and now I have help so I can work part-time as well. And the most challenging thing I found when I started looking after Dad was that everything I asked him to do, he'd say, I can't, I'm too old. It wasn't the memory loss, it was the I can't, I'm too old. So one day I just got fed up and I brought 2 jars to the kitchen table. And I said, right, Dad, that is your can-do jar and that is my can-do jar. From now on, any time the word can't comes out of your mouth, you have to put a gold coin in my jar. And any time I say can't, I'll put a gold coin in your jar. And when my jar gets full of your money, I get to spend your money. Now, I wasn't sure how this would go because of the short-term memory loss. Most instructions are just lost within 5 minutes. But I have done a lot of exercises to boost his memory. And do you know the most powerful thing that boosts memory? Money, exactly. You'll be amazed at how that man's language has cleaned up. No longer does he tell me he's too old to hang up the washing. He just sees the jar and hangs up the washing. It's great. Try this in your organisations. I have actually had organisations put in, install a can-do jar instead of a can-D jar. And anytime anyone says can't, they've got to put a gold coin in. And even the cynical ones don't want to part with their money, so they just won't say the word can't. And I've had emails to say, you've transformed my department from a complaining culture to a can-do culture. I can't believe that just changing one word has made all the difference. Now, this is a really powerful concept, so I'd just like you to turn to the person next to you or discuss among your tables, and if they've been boring, to switch tables when you come back after the break. Discuss with them what's something that you've been facing, that you've been thinking or saying, I can't, and make a commitment to them that from now on you'll simply change your language around that and start asking how. I'll give you a minute or two to think about that. Share that. Feel free to continue that discussion over lunch or any of the breaks, because now we have our next principle. Can I have a quick show of hands? How many regularly exercise of a morning? Oh, quite a lot. Great. Well, the rest of you obviously exercise in the evening. Getting physical exercise is actually one of the most powerful things we can do to boost our brain function. Research has found that even just a 10, 12-minute exercise session won't turn you into an athlete, but it will improve the blood flow, the oxygen, but also you start producing a chemical called BDNF, brain-derived neurotropic factor. And this acts like a fertilizer for brain cells. And the more we exercise, the more BDNF we produce, the more brain cells we produce, and the more connections between brain cells we produce. And studies have found that if you've got to do creative thinking or brainstorming or anything that's mentally complex, IKEA furniture assembly, if you do 10 to 20 minutes of exercise beforehand, you'll vastly improve your performance. It makes that much difference. Absolutely. And an hour of exercise a day is as powerful as Prozac in the treatment of depression. Now, we wouldn't need to have this conversation 100 years ago, because 100 years ago, Australians were walking about 16 kilometres a day just in the course of their daily lives. Today, we're lucky to walk 1. And I was reminded of this about 20 years ago when we had a family stay with us from rural India who'd actually never seen an elevator before, because they would walking all the time. And the first time they saw an elevator was when we were in David Jones. And the father and the son were standing with me and the mother was paying for something. And the elevator doors open and they saw this frail old lady walk in. And the elevator doors then closed, and a minute later, a tall, beautiful young woman walked out. And the father just looked at his son and said, "Quick, go get your mother." And half an hour of exercise a day cuts our lifetime risk of dementia and stroke in half. It's enormously powerful. Now for the next brain booster, oh, by the way, people always say, what's the best exercise to do? Really, any exercise that appeals to you. Now for the next brain booster, I invite you to stand for a moment. And what do you think it might... No. What do you think the next brain booster might be? Is to get standing. Standing is the new smoking. Australian are the leading researchers on the effects of... sitting is the new smoking. Australians are the leading researchers on sitting because we have so many willing subjects, and they've actually found that people who sit for more than 11 hours a day have a 40% increased risk of premature death compared to people who sit less than 4 hours a day. So now do the maths. If you sit more than 8 hours a day, you have a 15% increased risk of early death. Why is sitting so bad? Because we get no circulation, no muscle contraction, and when we get no muscle contraction, we don't clear glucose and lipids from our bloodstream. And that means that it stagnates and increases the risk of heart attack, stroke, and even cancer. And the bad news is, even if you flog yourself at the gym for an hour a day, it won't counteract the negative effects of prolonged sitting. However, all you need to do to counteract the negative effects of prolonged sitting is stand up for 2 minutes every 20 minutes. So you know what's in store today, don't you? But it's just in your daily work. I have a timer on my desk if I know I'm going to be sitting for a long time. Goes off every 20 minutes, just reminds me to stand up. It doesn't have to be dead time. Use that time to check your emails or SMSs or make a phone call. Thank you, that's your 2 minutes. Wonderful. The next brain booster is something that, just to remind us, it has a very similar effect to exercise, to just have a laugh a day. And in fact, laughter has become a serious science. It is called gelotology, and the use of laughter in therapy is called gelototherapy. And they found that in aged care, the more exercise people do and the more they laugh, the better their cognitive skills. And so try and get a laugh every day. And on those days, and the other thing too to remember is that laughter has us producing our own endogenous painkillers, endorphins. So scientists have found that if you're about to experience something painful, if you laugh first, it'll hurt less. Try this before going to the dentist. In fact, I can tell you it works. I've tried it in my practice before doing vasectomies on patients under local anaesthesia. Before, so the man is wide awake, but I numb the area I'm working on. Before I insert the needle into the scrotal sac, I ask the man to laugh. And guess what? He does laugh. I suppose under the circumstances, a man would do anything I asked. But let's face it, if it's possible to get a stark naked man to laugh when I'm holding a needle in one hand and the crown jewels in the other, possible to laugh in any situation. Speaking of the crown jewels, last year I was in Canada, and you know that they're absolutely ice hockey mad. And in the late, and this is what one of the delegates came and told me, and in the late 1800s, ice hockey became sort of really big sport. And very soon after, they invented what were known as caps to protect the crown jewels from flying balls. What amazes me is that it took them another 100 years to think of wearing a helmet to protect their brains. Even just a smile a day, as I mentioned earlier, will boost brain function. Now some really, really quick tips if you just want to increase your productivity and effectiveness in the moment. Get a change of scene. If you're stuck in a rut, the best thing you can do is get up from your desk, get a change of scene, but especially go outdoors into nature. Because when we're stressed, nature calms us down. When we're tired, nature actually peps us up. And while you're out there, get some sunshine. Because the sun is our best source of vitamin D, and low vitamin D levels are associated with an increased risk of Alzheimer's disease and poorer cognition. And 1 in 3 Australian adults are vitamin D deficient, amazingly. And even getting good light bulbs where you work makes a difference, and getting good light bulbs in aged care facilities and residences, improves people's cognition and engagement. The other thing is to live life with ongoing challenges. So celebrate the fact that you have so many challenges in aged care, because it is actually boosting your brain. And it also includes things like lifelong active learning, learning a musical instrument, a foreign language, an art, a craft, a skill, a sport, reading Shakespeare. All these things help to boost our brains. Now, if you're really busy, I understand you don't have time to learn a new language, but that actually delays the onset of dementia by 4.5 years, learning a second language later in life. But if you're super time poor, just get out of your comfort zones. Take normal daily habits, tweak them a bit, do them a bit differently. For instance, you might want to wake up and take a shower with your eyes closed because you're forced to use senses that you're not in the habit of using. Or brush your teeth with the opposite hand to usual. Getting ambidextrous is a good brain booster. Regularly speak to people you don't know. Forget stranger danger. It is great to meet new people. If you drive to the same place all the time, try and find a new route. Don't always drive to the same place the same way. Use your street directory rather than your GPS so you don't lose navigational skills. Find a new word in the dictionary at the start of each week and weave it into your conversations. Even just listening to music that's different to what you're in the habit of listening to has the effect of boosting your brain. So next time your neighbours inflict you with their noise pollution, you can thank them for boosting your brain. Now, if you're super time poor, I have excellent news. You can do all this in one hit. Find someone you've never met before. Take them home with you via a new route. Invite them to have a shower with you. With your eyes closed, remember? Use your new word in conversation with them and have weird music playing in the background. Your brain will love it. And see, anything's possible. And just to make the point that GPSs are not infallible. Okay, final ones to wrap up. You know that a good night's sleep is absolutely essential for effective brain function, decision-making, problem-solving. After 17 hours of wakefulness, our brain operates as though we had a blood alcohol reading of 0.05%. That's 7 a.m. to midnight. We're far better off going to bed rather than struggling to stay up and get the job done. And the final two, the most powerful and important brain boosters, is to get friendly. That means maintain meaningful social connections. It halves the risk of dementia to have connections and relationships that mean something to us throughout our, to the end of our days. We never lose our need to contribute and make a positive difference to our fellow person. And that's something that Dad has taught me. He does now Meals on Wheels, with 97-year-old Eric. Eric's the driver. Dad's the runner. I run when I see them. But they're a lovely couple. But no, really, that sense of value and purpose never leaves us. And it leads us to the final brain booster, which is the most powerful of all. And that is to get excited. Do things you love. Do things you're passionate about. Get enthusiastic. If you're excited about your work, your role, the challenges you're facing, you will handle them so much better. You'll be good at your work. Because excitement isn't just a feeling, it produces a whole cocktail of chemicals which boost our performance, particularly dopamine and acetylcholine. They help us focus, they bring us to our peak. So my overriding message is that we are all born with a far more capable, adaptable, opportunistic brain than we ever imagined. We are not passive victims of our genes. Our moment-by-moment choices do determine our health, our longevity, our performance, and our overall quality of life. So I encourage you to get wild, to get playful, to get smart, and of course, to get my book.